Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Webinar Talk Show. My name is Tom Singer.
And I'm Liz Green. And Tom, I have been talking to a lot of people lately who have had either an association event or perhaps it's a sales meeting, and they were thinking that they were going to have that meeting in person. And now it's become obvious that it's probably not going to happen in person. And I know we both share the opinion that we shouldn't be canceling our events. Don't cancel your event.
Hashtag don't cancel your event.
Yes, indeed.
You can take them virtual, and you can make them suck less than a talking head over PowerPoint.
Well, and in fact, you could, as we heard from Amy Clymer last week, make them even better if you are strategic about it. And boy, do we have somebody who's going to share some ideas about that.
We do. Today. And I am really, really excited because we're joined today by our friend, Jill Schiefelbein. And Jill, she's known as the dynamic communicator because this has been what she has done throughout her career, is really help people communicate better and get things done and take action. And now she has taken this skill set that she has and she's put it directly into this world of virtual meetings. And what she does is she is right now helping clients of all kinds, kind of similar to some stuff we're doing, in helping them take what was supposed to be that live event and move it into the virtual world, but have it be a transformational experience. And I love it when we talk about this because we don't want people to cancel their events because events matter. And company and association meetings, I think they matter more now than they ever have because people are hungry for it. Don't you think?
I agree. Absolutely.
So let's welcome to the Webinar Talk Show, Jill Schiefelbein.
Yay! Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, Jill. So you right now are coming to us because you're visiting your parents in Arizona.
I am.
So, but you have recently relocated right in the middle of COVID. You moved from New York to North Carolina.
Yeah, it's life is funny sometimes, but it's having space and trees and ample bike trails and everything, and a lower cost of living isn't the worst thing in the world right now.
I was going to say, if you had to be quarantined right now, it's probably better to be around those bike trails than it is to be around subways.
It's, I lived in a 34 floor building and I was on the top floor. And so trying to wait for an elevator with no one else in it or the stairways or I mean, it's a crazy situation. So my heart goes out to everyone who went through that experience. I was fortunate enough to get out early, very early in the year, and my heart goes out to them, and it's a fighting, struggling city that they'll bring back.
So Jill, as someone who for, the last 6 or 7 years has made their living as a speaker and a consultant to businesses, like all of us, you've seen sort of some upheaval in the last 4 or 5 months.
A little bit.
Little bit. And one of the things that you did is you decided to focus directly in on consulting with people on how to make their meetings better and how to make them really dynamic and how to keep the communication flowing. So can you take us back to when COVID first hit and your thought process around how you were going to pivot?
So when everything first happened, I'll never forget, I was at the airport in a parking lot about to get out of a car to get on a plane when the WHO declared it a pandemic. Like literally was about to grab my suitcase to walk to the plane to get on an event. So I called the event organizer and I said, I assume you just saw this message. Is it still happening? She said, yeah. So I flew to Vegas, did a speech. There's an empty casino, which is the weirdest experience.
Oh,
ever.
Wow.
And got back on a plane and then everything shut down, right? Everything shut down. So for me, I had timed a shoulder surgery a week later and thought, you know what? Okay, good. Some rest and recovery. But in the midst of that rest and recovery came a lot of clients who reached out to me because I've been doing virtual presentations, experiences, et cetera, for years. I did my first one in 2008. So a long, long time ago. And clients who I had done virtual things for in the past reached out and said, you know how to do this clearly. You're the best virtual speaker we've had. What do we do now? And I was fortunate. The opportunity came to me, and then I realized, oh, I should probably do something more about this. So then, you write the ebook, you put up the new website, you do all those things. And then I actually just started consulting with not-for-profits. When I first started my business, when I very first started and I had no clients, I would always find ways to serve, to do pro bono work and everything. And so I made a mission to serve 100 different nonprofits before the end of the year, in terms of consulting them on how to get into the virtual space for their events, to serve either those they serve, or to fundraise or do things they need to do. And then through that, more business came, because just like before, once you do good work and people can trust you, things start to happen.
That's really smart. Let's go back for a second, because one of the things that I always find very interesting when we talk is your insight around dynamic communication that is meant for people to take action. Because let's face it, speakers are always looking for people to do something. So are event professionals. So are business owners and executives. We all want our people to do something. What makes communication dynamic, action oriented?
So a lot of people, when they think of communication, they're worried about writing the perfect message and grammatically correct, I's dotted, T's crossed. And don't get me wrong, those things still have a place and they are important. However, you can make a couple typos and still get a message across and still drive action. You can forget to put a punctuation mark and still be effective. So to me, dynamic communication is really focused more on the other, instead of our egos being involved in that communication. And that's what's happening a lot. Like with events, we're so clung to what we used to do that we're trying to fit exactly what we used to do into a new virtual format, without thinking about the experience that the person is having on the other end. And you can't just do that. I mean, you can, but it's not going to be nearly as successful, and it's not going to
a lot
drive
of people are. I mean, that's a mistake a lot of people are making, is they're just taking what was an in-person event and cramming it into the virtual world. And that's why people are having Zoom fatigue. That's why people are rolling their eyes at some of these meetings that they have to go to.
They are. And, you can't blame them, right? Because when you're presented with a new situation, the first course of action is to try what works in another situation and see if it'll work in this new context. And what was considered what is acceptable to work 4, 5, 6 months ago is not considered as acceptable now. I published an article on this and talked about what I call herd efficacy, right? We're trying to build up this herd immunity, right, in response to COVID. But with herd efficacy, we as a group, as a society, are getting more and more confident in our usage of virtual technologies and virtual communication. And we're also, as a herd, having higher expectations of what we demand in these experiences. So that's a good thing for those of us who have been conscious about the pivot and really focused on that end user experience and the action and experience they will have. And communication goes into all of that, because without communication, none of that's possible.
That's really interesting. So when you have somebody who approaches you, let's say they have a 2-day event, it's supposed to happen in October, and here's the agenda they have all their speakers picked out. What do you do to help them make that switch and make that something that people want to go to, but also are getting a lot of value out of once they attend?
Can I address that on 2 points, from the speaker side and the event planner side? Is that useful to your audience?
Absolutely. Yes.
Sure.
So I want to say from the speaker side. So my first thing when I go into this and someone comes to me and says, we want to hire you as a consultant, help us figure this out, I say, okay, great. Tell me what contracts are in place. What are your non-negotiables? What are the non-changeables? Because if they've already contracted with a technology vendor, for example, getting out of that is different. So now you have to engineer something that works best with that platform, which is where, from a speaker perspective, one of the things that has been said by people who've been doing this a while is you need to become at least above an amateur in every main virtual video communicative software. And it's true, because, for example, if I have a client who's having me use GoToWebinar or GoToMeeting, number one, I hang my head in the corner and cry for a little bit. And then when I come back,
Thank God they're not a sponsor of the webinar talk show, but keep going.
I have a really funny story about them, how they attended a webinar of someone I consulted with and said, wow, this is the best webinar we've ever seen. We've never seen our software used like this before. And I'm like, yeah, that's not their bread and butter, as it were. But in any event, we, I go to them, and with GoTo, for example, as a speaker, it's in my contract that you will assign me the role of organizer before I log into the meeting, because that gives me the controls I need to give the experience that I want to have to deliver the results that I know drive the action. And so you need to know the nuances in those platforms to understand what you need to be asking for, because oftentimes an organization will have done something that way for a long time, and because that's the way they've always run meetings, they figure that, hey, these have worked, so why not? But you have the agency to educate, now in a kind way, not pushy, but I always say, one thing that you're going to see in my contract that is a detail, but I don't want you to overlook, is that I need to be assigned this role. So you may need to clear that with your organization, with legal or whatever. The reason I need this is because, and then I walk them through that. So from a speaker's perspective, you need to do that. And then also from a speaker perspective, it is amazing how many divas there are out there. And I mean that in the gender neutral sense, who have signed contracts this hit, and they're like, no, I said 145-minute session, I'm delivering my keynote, and that's it. I'm not expected to interact live. I'm not expected to be on chat. I'm not expected to do any of these other things. And come on. I mean, come on. I don't care if you're getting paid $500,000 to get on a stage. You are getting paid to serve, and you're getting paid to deliver a message that drives a result. And you cannot drive that result in the exact same way as being a talking freaking head for 45 minutes in the same way you can do on stage. And I know you love that phrase because it's in your tagline.
It is. It is. Well, and we've had the same experience of working with people where you do have to approach it with kindness and educate the speakers about, okay, sure, that's great, but we need to move you from, talking over your PowerPoint for 45 minutes to, all right, let's shrink that down. If you really want to present, let's shrink that down and do some interaction and some Q&A afterwards, or whatever it is, because it should be about the experience of the participant.
100%, and how the participant can best drive action. So to that end, like transitioning into the event and meeting planner side, I encourage everyone listening, watching at whatever time you're doing it, to pause for a second. And I encourage us to do this too. How many realistic distractions are around you? So for example, I'm at my parents' house. They, well, my dad is still asleep. It's Pacific time. He's kind of lounging this morning. My mom's there. She knows I'm in an interview. I told them last night, but my dad could pop in this office door at any second. That's a distraction. My phone is sitting right here. Let's be honest. Our phones probably all are, because whenever you do an interview or a virtual event, you need a secondary mode of communication. So if this goes down, this is right here. However, if the light comes on, I am going to be split second distracted, because my peripheral vision will pick that up.
Exactly.
Right. Here I have no pets. There's not a cat and a dog running around. So I actually have fewer distractions here, but then there's notifications on the computer that I think I turned off, but maybe I didn't turn them off all the way. This Microsoft Auto update just popped up. I mean, what? So those are easy, realistic distractions. And I have found
it doesn't matter when Eliz and I do these interviews, or if I'm doing a presentation for a client myself, the neighbor's lawn guy always shows up right at that moment.
Yes.
So it's really, think of the realistic distractions you have when you're sitting at home or whatever location you're safely working. Then think of the number of distractions that you potentially realistically have when you're sitting live in an audience where there have been decades and decades and decades of common rules of etiquette around that.
Right.
It's a huge delta. Totally. It's a huge delta. So how you experience things is very, very different. And so, you two are amazing at interviewing people and trying to get like the pulse of an event to the forefront, so people don't just have the stale experience. So when I talk to event organizers, it's okay, so this was a 2-day in-person event. My number one question is, why do people attend this event? What do they get out of it? Again, results oriented. What do they drive that? The smartest clients can answer that right away with actual data, not anecdotal data. And the even smarter clients realize, I don't think we can answer that with factual statistical data. So we're going to go survey the thousands of people who have come before and figure out what are the top 5 things that people value most about this event. And then figure out how many of those you can realistically bring to action, and then communicate about the ones that you're not. So as an event organizer, when I consult, I always tell them, you need to pre-game it with your attendees, right? And if that involves a cocktail, by all means, have a cocktail. But you need to pre-game it. And what that means is explain the experience they are going to have to set up that expectation. Because when you're in any event environment, one of the big things that we know psychologically is the shared experience is what makes an event magical. Now, when we're in person, the shared experience is a given because of the physicality. When we are virtual, it is not. Because for some people, a live event is, we have all these pre-recorded sessions that are just going to go live at this any given point in time. And there's a chat, but people may or may not use it. The biggest waste of opportunity.
Or worse, I've seen a lot of clients say, oh, we're turning off the chat.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
We just want them to pay attention to the pre-recorded speech that we did, 2 weeks earlier. And my theory is if that's what you're doing, they're literally going to the fridge. And I mean, literally, they go to the fridge.
You mean they have that playing maybe in the background while they're checking email, writing documents, creating their next presentation, or doing any number of things.
Building a sandwich.
Like, think of this. How many of you, if you go to something that you really, really need to do, so let's say, for example, that you need to create a flower bouquet out of flowers that you picked from your yard for a birthday, because you cannot get an order delivered for whatever point in time. And this is not like a life or death need, but it is very important to you, right? It's very important. You're determined to make it happen. You go to YouTube, you look up tutorials for this. You better believe you are going to pick the one that's on the first page that is the shortest. And even then, if within the first 10, 15, 30 seconds, depending on how motivated you are, it hasn't at least taught you something yet, you're going to the next video. If we do this with something if we do this with something we're invested in, like really invested in, how are we dealing with experiences? And that's where both speakers and event and meeting planners go well, is because they fall in love with their methodology. They fall in love with what they teach and the importance of what they teach. And let's be honest, nothing that any of us teaches in that specific moment is life or death. I mean, Eliz, I know you deal with stress and you deal with heart things, but in that specific moment, it is not life or death, because if it was, they would be in the ER. And so we can't take ourselves so seriously and so confidently and so ego-driven that, well, I am so fascinating and entertaining that someone will sit and listen to me this whole time without any other motivation except they know it'll help them do their job better. With the cat here, the dog here, the kids here, the partner there. No, not happening.
So this weekend, I actually attended a seminar because a friend of mine was a speaker at it, and I got a free ticket to it. But it was really kind of a pitch fest. Everybody except my friend spent their entire time selling. And I kept listening to a couple speakers because I was hopeful that I would get some real information and not be sold their coaching program. And while I was listening, I logged on my phone instead of my computer. And I walked around and did projects. I did the laundry. And I actually made my sandwich while I was listening to what wasn't that enthralling of a speech, but I knew my friend was up next. So when I talk about people going to the fridge, I mean it. If you don't engage them, they're going to make a sandwich.
They are. They may even eat the sandwich then. They may go to the bathroom. They may do a whole lot of things, right?
Hopefully they do not take the Zoom camera that was
Turn off the camera if you go to the bathroom.
We've all seen some things. We've all seen some things.
So Jill, what are some of the faux pas you've seen some people do as they've tried to pivot? And then what are some of the aha moments, the good nuggets?
Yeah, I mean, the faux pas, again, the biggest one, and then I'll give another one, is thinking you can take this exact program and shove it into a virtual space. It's not realistic. And even you're like, oh, well, people aren't traveling. People, can sit and do this all day at home. The reality is they're not going to. So to overcome that, think of how you can create half-day experiences or hybrid experiences where you have both on demand and live experiences. The next big faux pas is not giving a reason for people to be there live. So carrying off of that. If I am sitting and watching a video and there's no interaction, then I could have done this at any point in time. There was no need for me to block out my calendar and log in at a certain point of time when, you know what, that would have been the best break for me to go to the grocery store, whatever it is. And then that frustrates people. So you don't want to be doing that. What you want to make sure in that live experience is that there is a reason to be there live. And you can do this even if your entire event is pre-recorded segments. You can have interaction in the chat. You can have this, one of my favorite events that I've done had daily jumpstart videos that I got to produce, and then live, I called them the human touch segments at the end of the day, that kind of then interviewed other people and then took me out of the equation completely and just did the montage of responses and just had me kicking it off and shutting it down, which was a really cool feature. And people liked to, and they had a virtual selfie booth. The snap bar is my new favorite virtual selfie.
That's so smart.
Experience. It's so brilliant. We had themes every day, and this was the clients doing, this was, they're brilliant. They're the client who said, we don't know 100% what the most important things are about our event to people, so we're going to survey people. They got thousands of responses to this to help craft their experience. In the Daily Jumpstart, even though I was pre-recorded as the virtual guide every day, I acted like it was live. The majority of people thought it was actually live. And you cue people into the chat, you anticipate interactions, and you build those types of responses in to what's going on. And then you also build from the previous day. So I would pre-record on Sunday for Monday, on Monday for Tuesday, on Tuesday for Wednesday, etc. So you get some of the pulse, so you can make it feel as live as possible. But having that live chat there is so huge, because that's what inspires that interaction. And so then having the live meetings that people can do in smaller networking groups as a combination.
And I love this idea of sort of, I'll use the word chunking it, if you will, into these little kind of vignette pieces. I was working with a client and everything was going to be pre-recorded, but the day of the event, what we're talking about doing, we haven't ironed it all out yet, is I'm going to do live interviews with their people who gave the pre-recorded speeches, and we'll do a 10-minute live interview, and I can then follow the chat, and therefore that live portion is live following a pre-recorded thing. I think people won't even notice. We've talked about making all the speakers wear the same thing.
Oh, that's clever.
So that's way easier for males than it is for females.
Oh yeah, the hair is never going to look the same.
Nope, it's not. It's not. And you know what's funny is that's interesting, because there are pros and cons to that, right? There are huge pros and cons to that. I did an event a month ago with a group, and they had for their keynote speakers who were not comfortable in the virtual environment. And I applauded them for owning that. That's also huge. Most of the time, if you're a speaker and you know your own strengths, own those. And what this woman said was, she was a psychologist and talking about child trauma in the time of COVID. And speaking is not her job, but brilliant woman. So what we did was we had someone on the client-facing side interview this person, editorial team put that interview together. There was a 25-minute interview, different than 25 minutes of a talking head with PowerPoint. And we had some PowerPoint images that popped up in it along the way too. Then there was a live Q&A that was facilitated and moderated by both myself and this other person. And then we had the psychologist on there. And so we talked about, do we get the same thing? And we were all women, and we're like, it's not possible. Because even if we want to have that illusion, it's not possible. And so as a virtual guide, if you're in that role, you know, I set it up, I said, listen, this information is so important, and we wanted to make it as engaging as possible without technology coming in the way. So we're going to sit here together for 20 minutes to have this experience. While we're doing that, here's what we want you to do in the chat. And then afterwards, this live thing is going to happen. And it worked brilliantly on all fronts. So it's really thinking, what are the strengths of your speakers? What are the strengths of your program? What absolutely has to get across that is hugely essential without getting derailed? Because as you both know, and you guys are pros at this, You can keep an interview on track, but once some crazy question comes up that everyone sees, you can't take that back and pretend it didn't happen. So now you have to rewire that into the conversation.
Right.
You can
Right.
all move on, and that takes up valuable time.
It does, and sometimes moderating that Q&A is tricky, which is why you hire a professional to do that. The one thing I want to underline here is what you're saying about really coaching your participants about how they're going to experience this event.
Mm-hmm.
I know when Tom and I are emceeing, oftentimes we refer to the chat or the Q&A in what it would be in the in-person event. So the chat is your hallway,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's where you, or the person that you're sitting next to at the keynote, like, that sort of thing. And then the Q&A is the microphone in the room. And so it gets people to understand how they're participating. I think that's so important. And you're brilliant in describing it that way so that your client understands why that's so important.
Well, I think it's setting expectation is huge. And if we go back to my communicative roots, right? Mm-hmm. You can't expect to drive action if the people who are supposed to be driving the action don't understand what the action is. And as leaders, we often assume, and as not even people, we assume that because we know something, other people will know it in the same way that we know it. Or right. If I say, hey, go make me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, that you will make it the same way I would make it for myself. And actually, I think peanut butter and jelly is disgusting. I just want plain peanut butter. So you know what I mean? It's we know these things, but we often don't think, again, here's the end user. Now let's reverse engineer how we get that action. And that's what the whole dynamic communication thing is all about, is what is the goal you're trying to achieve, and then what do you have to put in place along the way to make that happen. The same process goes for events. And so any virtual event I do, not only is there a pre-event participation guide, is there a pre-event video explaining the expectations, whether that's me as a virtual guide or me with the organizer or just the organizer who's been coached, that's always there. And then the first 10 minutes of the first live session, I spend completely setting up where things are, what they are, why they're used, how they're used, what's the shorthand for this event, and all of those things. For example, something that I've used for years and years is we want a way to applaud, right? We want a way to applaud easily, but we can't. Like sometimes you're like, dang, that was a good point. And wait, you can't talk to anyone. And by the time you put it in the chat, you've moved on, your fingers weren't fast enough. So years ago, I started the virtual applause with exclamation marks. And I tell people at the beginning, when you want to do a virtual applause, use exclamation marks. It's the easiest thing you can do. And what I love seeing now is people who have been to one event that I see in another event, they start to use the exclamation marks. And I'm like, this is amazing.
We've done a similar thing, and it's so fun to see all of those exclamation points. Some people will put rows of them. Yeah.
It's incredible. And people want to be involved. People want to create a shared experience. And if you frame that out for them easily at the beginning, what those expectations are and how they can contribute, most people want to contribute and they will follow those. And I'll never forget the first live virtual presentation I did. It was back in 2008 using Adobe Connect, still around, not widely used, but still kind of around. Adobe Connect. And I, being the educator for, I was a professor at the time, I am going to get these people engaged. This is going to be yes, we can use a chat. This is exciting. And so I pose a question to the audience, when you think of the most important thing in XYZ, what is that thing to you? Crickets. Crickets. Nothing. And I'm like, you guys, do you know the chat? It's in this box on the left-hand side of your screen in the corner, and you can I'm trying to explain it. I'm like, okay, lesson learned, always explain things first before you expect people to use them. And then there was 2 answers. There were 35 people online. There were 2 answers, and they were full sentences. And so I had another question later, and again, and I'm like, people, it takes too long for people to type. And so then I'm like, all right. And at the end I said, you know what? Tell me this, A, B, or C, just on the spur of the moment. Like, I wish I could say I was so smart enough to pivot in that live moment. I so was not. But it was like A, this, B, this, or C, this. And I'm thinking people are going to type out the answers. They typed the letter. And it was like,
oh.
And that changed the way I did virtual events forever, because I use one letter responses for anything I possibly can, one word if needed. And also as a speaker, we're used to seeing audience nods and reactions.
Right.
And our egos tell us that means they're paying attention. Really, I can be sitting there nodding, thinking I want a donut, but at least we get that false sense of security. And I would love a donut right now, maple covered preferably. That'd be fantastic.
Now I'm hungry.
Now I want a donut.
I know, right? We all want donuts. But with that, it is a real sense of security when you see people engaged, when you see those active responses. And that's why it's so important as a speaker, if you draw your energy from the crowd, to know in other platforms what iteration they have to have activated and what role you need to be in order to cultivate that interaction.
So Jill, we're running into the end of the interview, but you bring up a point I don't want to leave behind. And that is for the audiences. We've talked a lot about what planners need to know and what speakers need to know. I still think audiences have a long way to go in being comfortable and understanding all this thing. What's one thing you would tell people who are going to be participating?
Oh, good question.
Yeah. What do people as a participant need to know moving forward?
Number one, if the event, organization, association, business, whomever it is, offers any type of pre-event training, a tutorial, a video, a one-page guide, read it, watch it, attend it. Because no matter how savvy you are, if the event organizer designed it with a specific path in mind, it's still going to take you time to catch up to how they want. And if they're smart, they'll have a guide that is teaching people along the way how to do it and cultivate it. But take the time to look at that, because everyone's shared experience is better when you don't have people in a chat saying, well, where can I find this? And then you do have community members policing them, like, it was in here. Did you not watch this? Oh no, I didn't. Well, that's your fault. And then, you know, but it puts the in group and the out group. So from a participant perspective, think of how can I be part of the experience, but also how can I be a part of creating the experience and not be passive in this? And if the organizer hasn't already told you that, ask them. Ask them how they want to participate. It's kind of like when I was teaching, the students who would proactively come to me and would be like, hey, you know, I know we don't have an assignment yet, but I just want to understand your expectations better. Like, they were my favorites all semester, right? Because they took that initiative. As a participant, you can also take that initiative. And that looks different in 10 versus 50 versus 5,000 person conferences, right? That obviously looks different. But if there's an event hashtag, start communicating ahead of time, start cultivating the experience. People do support what they help create, but we are also responsible for being proactive in that creation. So as a participant, that's my biggest advice. Be proactive in creating the event experience that you want to have.
I love that. So if somebody is listening and they have a in-person event that they are not going to cancel, don't cancel your event.
Don't cancel your event.
And they're thinking, oh, golly, we really need to talk to Jill. How would they find you?
That's amazing. Well, what you do first is you realize that, wow, it takes a team to put this together, and that team looks different than the in-person team that we used to use. That's number one. Come to me at dynamicvirtualevents.com or anywhere on social at dynamicjill. That's the easiest way to get me. And then think about, you know, what can we do with a combination of a virtual guide and amazing hosts who interview people live after they're doing their sessions or before, and how can we create this massive experience? Like, look at that trio plug right there. That's amazing.
That was great.
Actually, the smartest people would hire all three of us. I hadn't thought about that.
Right.
That's a good segue, Jill.
No, we do bring very different skill sets. Like from the bigger picture event organization perspective, the learner perspective, that's my whole background, right? You two being able to pivot with the speakers, interviewing them and getting a pulse for what they're saying and bringing it, you're brilliant at that. And so it's, you understand, you've been to enough conventions and conferences, what people ultimately need to know, like get to the freaking point. What's one thing you can tell for people?
Yeah.
But it's, you need a person who understands the technology as your MC. And that's what I think people mess up in these events. And I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but if I can have it for just a second.
Yeah.
This person may be a brilliant MC in person, and there's a lot of those, right? But if they don't know how to pivot like this, when there's a technical flaw, when something goes wrong, how do you redirect people? How do you anticipate the plan B? And then how do you also explain to other people who maybe have never used this technology how to use it? You're missing out. So if you can have someone who is a good MC and can do that, that's where you really need to go. And I'm not saying that completely self-serving. There are others out there that can do it. But please, if you have a big name MC that you want to bring in, have them as an MC and then have someone as your virtual guide and have them work in tandem so the virtual guide can set that high profile MC up for success. But it's a very different world and we all need people to help us navigate it. And that's where we're here.
Well, Jill, thank you so much for joining us here on the Webinar Talk Show. We have had, gosh, over 40 amazing interviews since COVID started. Twice a week, we've been interviewing people going back to, I think, the end of March, 1st of April is when we began this project, because Eliz and I really believe, along the lines of what you said, that great events are more than talking heads over PowerPoint, and you have to approach them differently. So it's been fun having you on here because the three of us, it's like speaking to the choir.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it is indeed.
It's fun.
It is indeed.
Everyone, you feel like you went to church, right? Everyone does.
Right. So you can find Tom and I at webinartalkshow.com, or we would love it, we would love it if you would like us on Facebook at Webinar Talk Show. We'll be back on Wednesday to talk about having more diversity in your events, either in person or virtual. So we'll see you on Wednesday. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.